We're taking a closer look at the growing scandal surrounding former Vice President Joe Biden. At least half a dozen women have accused him of inappropriate behavior over the last week. It could have a negative impact on his possible run for president in 2020. The former vice president is about to speak at a union conference in Washington. It is the first time he is speaking at a public event since the allegations surfaced. For more on this, I want to bring in Washington Post senior political reporter Aaron Blake. Aaron, good to see you.
Good to be here.
So what's been Joe Biden and the Democratic Party's response to these accusations, especially, obviously, as he potentially gears up to launch his 2020 campaign?
Well, I think we've seen a more cautious approach than we might have seen a couple years ago when the party was taking a very hard line on all of these things and really was more interested in how the women felt about these situations. I think that there is a feeling that the party may have reacted too harshly in the past, particularly when it comes to Senator Al Franken, who many in the party stood by even after he was forced to resign. There's been polling that suggests 2/3 of Democrats in his home state didn't think that he should have resigned. And so I think that Democrats are really taking a wait-and-see approach. They don't want to jump too quickly. They want to see what the accusations are, and they want to see whether Joe Biden is actually going to run for president in the first place.
You know, I want to play a little bit of what President Trump had to say about it just a while ago. But, you know, one of the things that is striking, Aaron, is I talked to somebody who's plugged into the Democratic Party. And what they say is, look, there is such a variety and a diversity in the number of people potentially running for the 2020 nomination as far as Democrats are concerned. And they don't want to have to go on the campaign trail, or they don't want to be canvassing and having to explain to a potential voter why the numerous videos that are all online that people can Google showing Joe Biden behaving in what some people believe is inappropriate behavior, while explaining that it was a different time and, you know, that was seen as a political strength back then and it's no longer seen as, I mean, they don't want to have to do that. Is that some of the things that they're going to have to wrestle with, the DNC?
Yeah, regardless of how you feel personally about what he's accused of and what any of these individual instances might say to you, the fact is, just practically speaking, this is an issue which the party has to deal with, and it's not a great issue for them to deal with. You know, these are certainly less serious accusations than we have seen against a number of other politicians and high-profile figures when it comes to the Me Too movement. But, you know, it leads to the question, which is, do you consider only what the person who engaged in this activity intended, or do you consider how he made the women feel? And if it's not the latter, then that's a very difficult thing to have a debate about.
Indeed. So let's play a little bit of what President Trump said about Joe Biden before he headed to California. Take a listen.
No, I don't see Joe Biden as a threat. No, I don't see him as a threat. I think he's only a threat to himself. I just don't see him as a threat. He's been there a long time. His record's not good. He'd have to run on the Obama failed record. You look at what happened with so many different things. North Korea, the Middle East, the economy never got going. No, I don't think Joe's a threat. I'd love him to be. I mean, look, I'd be happy with any of them, to be honest.
All right, Aaron, as you know, of course, the president has been accused of sexual misconduct or assault by at least a dozen women. Right before he made those comments, they asked him if he was the best messenger on the topic of inappropriate touching, and the president said he is a great messenger. Does something like this make Biden less of a threat to him?
Certainly, I think that this is going to take a little bit of the shine off. There have been a number of stories in recent weeks about Joe Biden's past when it comes to racial issues, when it comes to abortion, of course, the Anita Hill hearings. I think this is just one of a number of things that are going to come up and really reinforce the idea that for however well he is polling right now and however well he was viewed coming out of the Obama administration, this was always a much tougher proposition than I think a lot of people realize. There is a lot of stuff to mine through in his past. He has run for president twice before and it didn't go very well. So, you know, there is something to be said for kind of taking the long view of this. And certainly any decision that Joe Biden makes about this campaign is going to have to consider what the prospects of success are. Does he think he is going to go through this and actually emerge with a Democratic nomination? And that is anything but assured. In fact, I wouldn't say that it's a terribly likely possibility, just judging by the number of candidates who are in this race right now.
All right, so here's another thing I find really fascinating, Aaron. You've written extensively about Joe Biden this week, and one of your articles highlights how Fox News and Tucker Carlson have actually defended him. Tell me more about that and what's behind it.
Yeah, it is interesting that we've seen a number of Republicans and conservatives come forward and defend Joe Biden in recent days. I mentioned Tucker Carlson, who basically offered a quote-unquote apology on his air to contributing to what we saw a couple days ago, which was the video that Joe Biden put out explaining himself. We've also seen Congressman Steve King defend Joe Biden. We've seen Senator Lindsey Graham defending him, and kind of a handful of conservative personalities who have weighed in on this. Look, this is somewhat consistent with their general attitude towards these issues. They have taken a less rigid approach than the Democratic Party has towards issues raised in the Me Too era. But I also think that there is some sense that raising this issue and contributing to the divide that exists in the Democratic Party over how to deal with this issue is something that Republicans are only so happy to do at this point, because right now this is a very difficult issue for Democrats to deal with.
Indeed, because as you pointed out in our top of our discussion, the Democrats have struggled with course correction, right? I mean, obviously, there is a generation of Democrats who have a track record when it came to Bill Clinton, right back in the 1990s and the 2000s. And then they seem to course correct with Al Franken, the allegations around Senator Al Franken in Minnesota, and the allegation of groping and inappropriate behavior that he exhibited. And so it's tough for them. It doesn't seem that they're trying to, it feels to me as if they're trying to sort of, test the winds, whereas Republicans are generally a little bit more firmly entrenched in how they're going to approach situations like this.
I would wager that if we hadn't gone through the Al Franken situation in late 2017, we might have seen a swifter response from Democrats on this issue. Franken was basically in much the same position that Biden was, albeit with some slightly more serious accusations against him. He was saying that these were misinterpreted, his intentions weren't to make the women feel uncomfortable, that he didn't agree with exactly what was being accused. But eventually the Democratic Party in the Senate came out almost in unison and called for him to resign. And eventually he did that rather quickly, actually. But there is a real sense of some buyer's remorse on the Democratic Party with how all that played out. Al Franken was somebody that many people in the party regard very fondly. They feel like they jumped to a conclusion that he was held to a much higher standard than the president and some Republicans have been. And so I think given that example, that's why we are seeing a slightly more cautious approach here. And even in some quarters like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi offering some very supportive comments of Joe Biden.
So, Aaron, game this out for us. I mean, it is interesting to me that the president himself has been accused by over a dozen women of the allegations of inappropriate behavior, sexual assault. But do you see a world where if Joe Biden is potentially the nominee, this Oppo research that is done and the videos that exist all across the internet of Joe Biden is used as a way, in addition to all the other things that, the Democrats are going to have to deal with, Anita Hill and, and race issues that the former vice president will bring to light, people who are against him will bring to light. Do you see a world where Republicans are using some of these videos and saying, look, Joe is crazy and he's inappropriate, even though the president, the standard bearer of the Republican Party, has been accused by dozens of women of much worse?
Yeah, I mean, the argument is going to be, and we've already seen the kind of creepy Uncle Joe thing propping up on various networks. There is video of these things. They may not, the accusations are not as serious as the ones that President Trump faces, but there is footage that Republicans can use to drive home this point. They could simply argue that there's no proof of the accusations against President Trump, but there is video proof of Joe Biden acting in these manners. I'm not sure how effective an argument that would be, but you would certainly see them to some degree try and mitigate this line of attack against President Trump. And I think Biden being the nominee would certainly play into that to some degree.
Aaron Blake, you wrote a really interesting article for the Washington Post. Joe Biden finds defenders in unusual places, Fox News and the GOP. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. We appreciate it as always, my friend.
Thanks, Vlad.